took our break. All right. Whew. We did it. You made it here. We're at the last 3 steps in this recruitment step ladder. We've got interviews, contracts, and onboarding. And before we even get started, I just want to say congratulations for getting here. You've put in a lot of work in these last 2 days, and we've been so excited to have you. So thank you all so much for being here and being so engaged and participatory. And again, congratulations on getting through our retention content yesterday and then getting through this ladder, our recruitment step ladder today. So first we'll be talking about phone screening interviews. So just like with everything, as I've said over and over again, we encourage folks to track your results. And in the R&R plan template, there is an Excel sheet called Candidate Tracking Sheet, and this is a tool for tracking applicants through that recruitment process. So once you begin to attract those candidates, again, carefully track those results. It's critical to respond quickly, as we've already talked about, communicate often, and ensure that rapid turnaround of questions, interviews, and site visits. And then like I said, we've got this tracking tool. It's a tool for tracking applicants through that entire process and can help you stay on track and engaged and involved. Okay. There we go. I was having trouble advancing my slides, but I got there. And then in terms of your recruitment interviews, there's some key steps. Prepare that content ahead of time, that overview of the health center, just like we talked about for writing those job postings and advertisements. You want to make sure you're telling the story about the place this candidate would potentially work. You want to then have a good understanding of you want them to have a good understanding of who they will be working for and with, and the community they will be serving and would be a part of. During the phone interview, again, do that work of describing the health center, outlining the position, and ask your set of questions, and make sure you allow time for them to ask their questions as well. And of course, I know it's often hard when we're, listening to a bunch of different candidates or seeing a bunch of different folks, but make sure you're really listening and taking in what they're saying and keeping track of it and recording it. And then as you finish the interview, make sure to let folks know what they can expect next, give them a timeline, and be as specific as you can be about what the next steps will be, and thank them for their time. They have, whether they're unemployed or not, they've given you their time to get to know them as you have given them your time. And so just say thank you and be appreciative of that. And then after the interview, make sure that you're recording those responses, present those results to your recruitment team that we've talked about. See if there's any additional questions you have for that candidate that you might want to follow up with, either via email or on the phone. And then start thinking about whether the candidate is a good fit. And then if so, you can schedule that on-site interview, or if you're not doing an on-site interview, whatever your next round of interviews are. And then as we've talked about in each section, we want to make sure that folks are really intentional about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We all have these implicit biases, and it's important to be aware of them and their impact on your hiring practices. So as Michelle has talked about, and I've talked about in previous sections, it's really critical to apply that DEI lens across the process and be intentional from those advertisements to your recruitment team. Use these opportunities to build that culture throughout the process. And again, as Michelle talked about over the last couple of days, social justice is at the very heart of the health center movement. DEI is our past, our present, and our future. So making that commitment and then living it out is so important. And then in terms of interviews, again, we all have implicit biases, but this doesn't mean that we're bad people. It just means that we're a product of growing up and living within the societies that we have. So despite that, it's important to interrupt those biases, and to do so, we must be aware of them and aware of the impact it has on these different elements of our lives, including hiring practices. The racism inherent in a lot of hiring has been well documented, and there are 2 studies that show how that plays out that are listed here. In the first experiment, researchers sent out resumes with similar levels of education, experience, and so on, but the names differ. So the resumes have stereotypically Black or Latino names, or so some of them have those, and the others have stereotypically white names. And then you can see from on the side, the results were that those with the stereotypically white names received on average 24% more callbacks than Latino applicants, and 36% more callbacks than those with stereotypically Black names. And in the second experiment, applicants went in person to apply for a job, and they each shared their similar qualifications, but some of the participants were white while others were Black or brown. And again, you can see the result, or the results were that folks who presented as white were able to get jobs at a higher rate. And the study also found that those folks who whitened up their job resumes ended up getting more interviews in the first place, and that folks are less likely to do that when they're targeting an organization that presents itself as committed to workplace diversity. So again, as we talked about in that last section around including that diversity, equity, and inclusion statement in your job postings, you'll be able to get more authentic resumes from folks who are being their full selves and knowing that their full selves will be welcome in your organization. So it's important to know these things and think about how we can mitigate the impact of these biases. So again, in terms of applying that JEDI or DEI lens, in terms of candidate selection, here are some suggestions. I'm not going to read through all of them because there are a lot, but we wanted to include all of them because you'll have access to these slides afterwards. Some of the things I wanted to focus on or highlight, though, are to have all your interview panelists and hiring managers attend a training or online assessment for that anti-bias behavior prior to the interview, and then ensure you have a panelist from the department you're hiring for, as we've discussed, and assess each applicant against the inherent job requirements. And then as you're thinking about your recruitment interviews, some screening recommendations are to establish a hiring committee, as we've talked about, to screen those applications and include diverse representation. Make sure that those committee members demonstrate an understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion principles. And you can invite external partners if needed. You know, we often hear and we know that it's true that it is difficult to recruit diverse staff into a homogenous organization already. So if you don't already have that diverse staff and you need to ask members of the community to come in and help you de-homogenize your staff, that you're welcome to do that. That's a good way to do that. And then another way that you can do things early on in the recruitment and interviewing process is to remove names from applications. Again, we saw in those studies that just having a name that people associate stereotypically with a race or ethnicity can diminish their chances of even getting a chance to interview. So if you in the HR position can remove that and then allow folks to make the decision simply based on the content of a resume or cover letter, that's a good way to do it. And then again, as we've sort of talked about and mentioned, make sure that you're inviting BIPOC staff and other folks with minoritized and marginalized identities to participate in those interviews, to make sure that you're getting that diverse perspective and that you're showing, again, that you're a welcoming and open organization. Some other things to consider and remember around recruitment interviews is the importance of language. Language is a powerful tool and it serves as both a way to communicate with others and a way to shape the world around us. So being cognizant of the language we use in recruitment and retention work both communicates our values to existing and potential new staff, and it also helps shape our environments as inclusive and equity focused. It's also important to remember that language is constantly evolving, and what's considered appropriate changes with time and depending on the situation. So for example, some people might prefer person first language while others prefer identity first language, and any group is not a monolith. We don't want to assume we always know what is the best language to use. So for some of these, if you're not sure what to use and what's appropriate, you can ask. It's really important to just ask folks what they would like to be referred to or how they would like to be referred to. And so think about the different categories of language that we have listed here that communicate your values. So is any of the language you're using ableist? Is it fatphobic, or does it show anti-fat bias? Does it exclude from different gender identities? Is there misogyny or sexism sort of baked into the language, just even on accident? And then is there any racism or appropriation? So a good example of this is we often hear folks saying that they're going to have a powwow, but when they mean that they're just going to have a huddle or a meeting. And when we use appropriative language like that, where we can show a potential staff member who is Indigenous that we're not necessarily respecting their culture or their background. So it's important to think through the language we're using and make sure that we're being appropriate and thoughtful and culturally humble. And remember that it's all about serving patients. That's the end goal and the end result. And when we build inclusivity and equity into our R&R practices, the end goal and result should be that we're better serving our patients from diverse backgrounds, races, ethnicities, and other identities. And being a leader in your community to have these organizational values is a really cool place to be, and we have the privilege of being able to be in that place as health centers that come from these really powerful movements. Again, some practices to consider in terms of your interview questions are listed here. Again, I won't read through all of them, but some things to think about and look for as folks are answering these questions in the interviews are, did the candidate address different aspects of diversity beyond race and gender? Did they think about disability, religion, etc.? Do they have a clear understanding of what equity and inclusion means? And do they appear to champion these values? Those are some things to think about as you're asking folks these questions. So now we'll talk quickly about on-site interviews or a site visit. If you get to this stage and if you're doing this as part of your recruitment and retention or your recruitment, this is an opportunity, and we've kind of alluded to this too in the advertising and all of these different things, but this is really your opportunity to showcase your health center and your community. It's a chance for you to get to know the candidate better, of course, and see if they would be a good fit. But in the event that they are a good fit, you want to make sure that they would be excited to accept the position and to come to be part of what you've got going on and what your community has to offer. So again, planning ahead is really important. Think about the logistics. Think about who you want to be involved in this process, who from the health center will partake, and what will their roles be. I know in my group earlier we talked about taking folks out to lunch, but who's the best person to take any given candidate out to lunch, or who would be participating in that, and what would their roles be, and beyond your health center, think about what other community members you'd like to include. Are there patients who are really strong? Do you have any board members who you might want to introduce folks to? Are there other leaders in the community, real estate agents, etc.? And these folks can give candidates a warm welcome and make the idea of working for you really appealing. And this is, again, like we said, more if you're bringing in a clinical provider from outside the community. It is great to hire as much as possible from within your community. And of course, you know what's best for your health center. And we know, as we've talked about, this stuff is expensive, but turnover is more expensive, and this has to be sustainable. So what are you going to do? Make sure that you're doing what is right for you and something that you can continue and make sure is available throughout. And then again, in terms of planning ahead, think about if they have a partner, a spouse, other family member, are you bringing them? Are you thinking about showing them schools, showing them childcare, anything like that? And then make sure that there's a joint itinerary as well, and be inclusive and welcoming of family. Families often have the greatest impact on people's choices. And then again, think about the piece on language here. When you're talking about family, who are you including in that, and what's coming across to people? I do also see there, sorry, I'm having trouble scrolling without it scrolling really far up, but there's a comment in the chat from Deborah about an example of appropriate language or reference changes. So I really love that. And then Suzanne also shared that she knows that many folks have applicant tracking systems within their HRIS, but if you don't, check out the tracker that's part of those template tools that I was talking about earlier. So yeah, definitely check out the resource we shared, and I'll definitely be checking out what Deborah shared. So then again, we've got, as we've talked about, things have changed in COVID. It's really important to remember that we, again, as we're sort of on the other side of it, things are maybe getting back to in person, but maybe the world of COVID has really opened up, that you've seen that you're able to get to know folks and show folks around in this virtual way. So it's important to think about, if you're going to go that way, how you can still make it really personable and how you can really showcase your health center in the best light. So if you're doing a virtual on-site interview, think of it in the same way that you would do an in-person one. So bring in different people. Don't just have it be one person as a talking head the whole time. See if you can go on a virtual tour of your health center, put on a GoPro and walk through the health center, or think about how to be welcoming to your candidate's family in a virtual setting. And of course, this is an invitation to just be creative, as so much of COVID has been. And I know that in a lot of ways has been exhausting, but if we can get to a place where we're excited about the opportunity to be creative, that's maybe a new way to try to re-engage with this stuff. And then again, as we've been talking about, making sure to plan ahead, the R&R plan tool template has this outline of all the different elements that you might want to include in your site visit interview, and all the ways that you might want to plan ahead. And if you, as we mentioned before, completing all of this can then count as your comprehensive workforce plan for HRSA. So if you do all these pieces and you plug them into the R&R template, you can see how useful this is, and you're meeting a deliverable that's been asked of you by HRSA. And then, as we've been talking about, following up with the candidates is so important. So make sure you develop a plan, think about the frequency of your follow-ups, the timeline of your follow-ups, the type of contact, whether it'll be phone, email, etc., and who is responsible. And this again goes back to so much of what we've talked about already in terms of your recruitment team, and knowing, just having that plan in place so that you're not scrambling after the interview, and you're making sure that you know in advance what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and who's going to be doing the activity. Oh, I went too fast. All right, so next I would love to hear from y'all if you have any unique ideas, or if there's anything that you've implemented that's a unique aspect about your on-site interview process or your. And I'll stop sharing so that Suzanne can share the Mentimeter.
Yeah, and I know this is different. Sorry, let me turn on my video. This is different with everyone. I just want to, put in there, and it really just depends on the community. And obviously, COVID has sort of put a wrench in things, but I will share this while you guys are putting in to Mentimeter. So I was working with the health center, and they're in a very, very rural area. And so it's really important for the health center CEO to make sure that they vet the candidates, and that also the candidates really understand what life is like in that community. And their on-site visit is 5 days long. and she ensures that it's over like a weekend. And she's like, I pretty much spend every meal with them, you know, like, or, you know, lunch and dinner kind of thing, and make sure that they, you know, that they have the opportunity to experience it all, whether it's from like the local ski hill to, you know, houses of worship, you know, like whatever they want to experience is there. And I was blown away when I was told that. And, but, you know, to the CEO, it was really important for folks to really, not only for them to understand, like, you know, or for the health center to understand what and this is for providers, for what the providers were like, but also that they understood what life was like there in the middle of winter when it happens to be a long winter there. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. I'd never heard of a 5-day on-site visit before. So anyway, I just wanted to share that, but I thought that was, and again, not every health center has the capacity or desire to do that, but I thought that was really unique and wanted to share. So,
Suzanne, do you know from that experience how many of those folks ended up, you know, working there versus how many folks were like, oh, this is really rural, I can't, or whatever?
She said that everybody that she had brought in like that had signed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean,
yeah.
And I would say, like, being there, like, the community is charming and lovely. And obviously you have conversations about like what the community is like. And, you know, people now have internet, so, you know, you can Google, you know, a gazillion things. But yeah, she said everybody that came, she said pretty much once she started talking to people, she said, you know, she referred to it as Mayberry. You know, it's just a really charming community, and not everything is idyllic, but anyway, so yeah, great question.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. All right, so we've got some responses here. Invite people to come during community events. So yeah, that makes sense of a time when your town is doing something exciting to be able to share. Like, of course, this isn't every day, but we've got this special thing going on. That's cool. And then we've got not necessarily unique, but we try to make sure they meet a wide range of employees, use realtor connection in one part of our area, try to emphasize anything we have found out would interest the candidate, like hobbies, etc. Yeah, that's all great. That makes a lot of sense. And then send them links to websites ahead of time, like housing, visitor centers, school systems, etc. And then another one says, I think we try to give true representation of the workplace and culture, e.g. we do not wine and dine prospective candidates. We also require face-to-face interviews to reinforce our patient client-facing culture. I think that's important too, to, yeah, if like you don't want to be misrepresenting your workplace culture as one that yeah, does wine and cheese nights or whatever when that's not accurate. So that's important too. And then a slight tangent, but in my experience as a candidate and as part of interview teams, a scenario-based interview process can be a fantastic selection process, especially if someone very experienced can be the role player in the candidate scenarios. I love that. That sounds not only like a great way to get to know someone and to have someone know the kind of patient they might be interacting with, but also it sounds really fun. And I think that that's another thing that can be a really good recruitment tool, is to make sure that folks are having fun. And then our last response that I'll read is, we buy the provider a rental car during their visit and encourage them to get lost. You can't really get lost here. So they can see how life might be like if they were to live, work, and play here. Also great. I love that. Yeah, go have an adventure, and we'll see you when you get back. Awesome. Thanks so much.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love all of those, but especially that last one.
Yeah,
that's kind of fun.
Nice. All right, great. Thanks so much. All right. Oop, let me reshare. Okay. Great. So now we'll talk about contracts super duper briefly. But we know that not every health center does contracts, and that it's not necessarily a practice everyone wants to engage in. So we're not necessarily saying like you need to do this, but we also know that a lot of folks do already engage in this. And so we want to give some best practices and some thoughts on that. So to that end, the things you should include in your contract are listed here. So work expectations, including clinical hours, administrative hours, and on-call hours, behavior, office sites and location, and call schedule, and then also include compensation and benefits, professional development, expenses, moving allowances, termination clause, anything like that. And clear expectations really make for the best experience with for the largest swath of people. So this means that both parties can go into the arrangement with their eyes wide open, and so that when your provider comes on board, they really have a full understanding of what's going to happen during their time at your organization. And the R&R plan template does include a section on contracting, so take a look at that if it's something that you're interested in or that you all do at your health center. And there are specific things you should keep in mind to make sure you ask about, but it also varies by state and community. So the R&R plan has this list, but make sure you're also in line with your state laws and recommendations. And that said, it is something you need to think about to ensure that your new hires have everything they need worked out by the time that they start. I'm going to quickly check the chat. We have a question in the chat too. If you haven't seen it, Suzanne is wondering if anyone has opted out of comp, so you can answer her question there while we continue on. So we'll talk quickly now about onboarding. It's this really crucial step in integrating new hires into your organizational culture, and it allows you to set the new hire up for success and in turn set yourself up for success as an organization. We do think it's really important to note that orientation is not the same as onboarding. Onboarding is a completely different thing. For new hires, orientation is this one-time event welcoming them to your company, whereas onboarding is a series of events that includes orientation and that helps folks understand how to be successful in their day-to-day job and how their work contributes to the overall organization. And so at orientation, new hires are formally introduced to your organization and its culture, mission, vision, and values, and ideally that's conducted pretty early on. But then during onboarding, employees are thoroughly introduced to their department. They learn the culture and the business objectives of your organization by participating in meetings and starter projects with coworkers, and their managers should schedule regular check-in meetings with those new employees so that they get comfortable talking to one another, and gradually they'll learn the specifics of their role, their responsibilities, etc. And your onboarding plan should focus on what matters most to each department, with the goal of helping new employees make connections between those organization-wide goals and their day-to-day tasks. This can also include within the first 90 days or after the first 90 days, working with new employees to develop smart strategic goals. And during this process, you can review their initial experiences with the organization to assess how engaged or connected they were able to feel to the organization. So onboarding should be, like I said, this entire process with the end result be having someone become fully part of your health center culture. And that's not to say having someone assimilate into your organizational culture, but to feel included and to feel part of the team. It's about onboarding them into more than just your organization as well, but into the community as a whole, again, as we've talked about. So think about if there are community members or connections that could be introduced to, etc. And then you also want to be really clear about what's expected of them and what they can expect from you to build that trust. And that the integration piece is having them be part of the organization and the community, as we've talked about, and bringing them in all these different aspects. And that's where this culture part comes in last, where they actually become part of the culture. And I know I already said it, but I just want to really drive home the point that the goal is not assimilation. It's crucial to understand your organizational culture, but finding the right fit is about inclusion, contribution, and that positive evolution and change. So when you're bringing someone in, they're bringing value. They're bringing value to your health center, and you want to make sure that they're aligned with your values, as we've talked about in all these different processes. But you also want to make sure that you're seeing their value as well and sharing that value that they bring with the rest of the staff, so that they're onboarded and included, again, without having to assimilate or change who they are and change their inherent values, etc., to fit it. And then, of course, Communication is so important. It should be continuous. It should be two-way. And if that trust isn't there, that's the quickest way to have folks leave. Onboarding is this bridge between recruitment and retention. So it's really this opportunity to you've done this whole process, and now you're starting to retain someone immediately as you're starting to onboard them. And so that trust should be strength-based. It should be empathetic, and it goes back to this idea that the process takes two-way communication, and two-way communication makes everyone better at their jobs and increases job satisfaction. This can be done in different ways: emails, staff meetings, posting in the staff lounge, employee engagement surveys, feedback cards, etc. They're all good ways to make sure you're having that that communication, and you should be intentional with your everyday conversations. Show folks how to engage in this, be a leader there, challenge your staff to continue to grow, and recognize people as individuals. And then be sure that part of this two-way communication is that when you're receiving feedback, you take it in and are willing to make changes if you need to. And of course, we can't change everything all the time, and some changes either aren't feasible or don't make sense within your company culture, etc. But make sure that part of that listening it includes action when possible. And again, talking about the importance of this positive communication, as we talked about, language really matters. And strengths, it's important to think about what you're saying and doing and how it's reflecting your values. Practice that bi-directional communication and creating that dialogue, and take a strengths-based perspective. And strengths-based approaches concentrate on the inherent strengths of individuals, families, groups, and organizations, and then deploy those personal strengths to aid the organization as a whole. And then, of course, it's important to think about, why are we doing this? Why do we care about onboarding? And the long and short of it is that it integrates new employees into your organization. It creates those clear expectations for both parties. And then it helps productivity occur more quickly. And again, it reduces that turnover, which, as we've talked about, is really expensive. So it's really good to be intentional and thoughtful about how you're doing this to have those long-term results and save yourself money in the long run. All right, sorry, I was just checking on the chat again. So now, since we're nearing the end of the day, instead of sending you to breakout rooms, we thought we would just have a sort of bigger discussion to think and talk about onboarding. So in what ways does your current onboarding program excel, or how can you improve your onboarding program? And I'm going to stop sharing so that it can feel like we're all in the same room. And I would just invite you to turn your cameras on. And this will be our time when we can sort of feel like we're all in the same space together after these 2 days. I'm going to put the content of those questions in the chat as well, so you have them to reference. And if you want to take a moment to think about it, that works. And then we'll just start to chat and reflect together.
Yeah, and I don't want to pick on anyone, but I think it was either Patty or Heather shared in group 2 about having, I think it was Patty maybe, that you have a form that you have every manager fill out, so they make sure that their first week or so, what's going to happen.
Yeah, I have a new hire template for my managers to follow, because what I was seeing is that once they left our orientation with HR, check off all our HR boxes, I had no idea what they were doing. And so I made a template. Some of my department heads have changed it to go through every single piece that their employees need to do, which is really amazing. So it's pretty much a checklist. That way the employee actually knows what they're going to do for at least the next week. And like I said, some of my other managers have extended it for a whole month. You're going to meet with marketing department, you're going to meet with the development department, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's really neat. We just implemented it. So I'm interested to see. I haven't gotten any feedback yet from our newest members of our team, but I will in a few months to see how they did and if it worked. So onboarding is not just a week either. It's a long time, depending on the department. You know, at least 6 to 9 months to get somebody, I feel like, really in your organization and part of the culture.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process, and I agree on the 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback off what Patty just said, we're actually in the process of formalizing a checklist based upon the position. So we had all of our managers walk through their respective positions, map them out in terms of what policies need to be covered by whom. And so we're kind of in the final phase of reviewing and finalizing that. But the goal is to ensure one, everybody has a consistent onboarding experience with regard to their particular position, but to make sure that we also are covering those policies and procedures, processes that this individual will need to be successful in the role.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Again, to like Patty and Al were saying, to both set the new hire up for success of knowing what's coming and knowing what's going on, and especially when there's multiple people involved, to make sure that everyone knows their responsibility and knows like where the new hire is in the process. It just makes everything run more smoothly and can really help folks feel welcome.
I think it also helps with continuity, especially for new managers. When they come on, you know, you might have one manager who's been there a while and does a fantastic job with onboarding, but again, it's sort of siloed. It's within that individual manager, and when that manager moves on, especially if he's moved or she has moved out of the organization, then this process will help with that continuity, and also again, provide that new manager with a roadmap as well.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely. All right, what are some other ways in which your onboarding programs excel?
We actually spend the first week doing meet and greets with all of the various department heads, directors, managers, and allowing them to come in, meet the person, share contact information. Sometimes they come in with PowerPoints that they've created about their departments. So it kind of gives that new hire that, you know, overview introduction, but also some insight into various departments that they may not be a part of, but in some way will be touching on throughout their career here. So that's been really helpful, and it allows them to ask questions and get to know people, even kind of as an icebreaker in a way, so that they know who to reach out to if there's something that comes up along the way. And this is all before they start kind of deep diving into the patient care aspect of things and training on the EMR system and all of that, so that they get a lot of that upfront stuff taken care of, and then they go into those types of trainings.
I really like that, Yadira. I think one of the things that, so Al kind of touched on it, and then you did as well, you know, departments tend to be kind of siloed. So if you bring the, you know, if you're, you know, as a part of that onboarding process, you allow folks to sort of see and meet and understand like other departments. I think sort of, I mean, yes, you know what the health center's mission is, but I think, you know, if you understand and are listening to and are talking to people from other departments, even if, you know, it might just be like, you know, one touch point, you know, during that process, I think it helps really solidify, you know, getting embedded in the organization. So
even for myself, having been here at my organization for a very long time, you know, I'm hearing the conversations that are going on through the training rooms right next door to my office. and I'm learning things about these other departments as they're meeting with these new individuals. So it's been a good thing, even just for myself, to kind of be aware, and then I can speak to those types of things on the recruiting end to entice people to want to join us. These are all the services and the things that we have currently and what we're working on for the future.
One thing I also wanted to add, so, you know, when you're onboarding people that are also remote, or if the whole team is remote, taking into account just like those intricacies of that. So in a job that I had, I was onboarded, but it was like a very set schedule, which was great, but I was taken to meet everybody in every department, but I was never explained who did what. So, and my supervisor was remote, so I had no idea and Suzanne, it was not you. Suzanne's my supervisor and she's remote. I just want to like clarify, it was not this job. But it was really interesting, because then my assumption was the people who I spoke to, that's who I would email for these issues. And when I sent those emails, I got really angry responses of like, this is not my job, this is not my role, why are you asking me this? And it just felt like I kind of had to sort of dig through everything on my own. So, keeping in mind on that, especially if either the supervisor or the person is not there in the office, having as much communication as possible, or even if, both of you are in the office, the communication is important, but that disconnect on a virtual space.
Yeah, thanks for sharing and being vulnerable. I know that can be a little bit stressful, but I definitely agree. And I think that so much that goes back to all these things that folks have been sharing and talking about is having it be really clearly laid out, so that not only is the item on the checklist, introduce new hire to so-and-so, but explain who the new hire should go to for this, that, or the other. And having those things really clearly laid out is really helpful and can help folks not feel so out of whack.
So we just we've been utilizing a new HR system, but we started using it for everything now. Our payroll, our timekeeping system. So when a new employee comes on board, it sends a message out to everybody across the board who she is, what she's doing, and then she has access to our company directory. So what everybody's role is and what they do. And it even has a picture of everybody on there. So you can actually see what everybody looks like. So, because, on the first day, whenever you're being introduced to 100 people, you're not going to remember who they are, what they do, and what they look like. So I think that that's really important is once they get to their clinic, then they still know who to reach out to, how to get a hold of them, and what their role is.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. And like you said, including the photos, because you're so right. You can meet so many people in those first couple days or couple weeks. And so to be able to have that reference is really helpful. That's awesome.
So every new employee starts out at our administrative location, and they spend an entire 2 days at our administrative location, and different departments come to them. So our IT department always gets to spend time with them the second day. And then we have a schedule built out for, sometimes a month at a time, so that, they can get exposed to the EMR system, and then our IT department will go back out to them and help them with the things that they're struggling with. So they spend time with the quality department. Sometimes, it just depending on their role, they spend time in scheduling. They spend time with our coders, just getting at least an hour or two of training there. So
that's awesome. I really like the ideas. I really like the idea of having, at least for those first couple of days, having the departments come to them. That feels a lot less overwhelming than having to like go around and figure out where you need to be. Just know that you're in the right spot and folks are going to come to you for your first couple of days. That feels great. So I saw that Alex, you had your hand raised earlier. Did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think just kind of building off of all of that stuff, one thing that I've seen done and kind of realized to do informally when I'm in a new place is finding when places pair someone with like kind of a peer resource. Like when they do it officially, they kind of have a term for it, but just someone who's not maybe your supervisor, who, in Michelle's case, like she was talking about, might be remote, or might work in another building, or you just don't want to bug them because, it can be kind of intimidating to the first few weeks of your job, feel like you're knocking on their door or sending them emails constantly. Have someone else you can reach out to who already knows the organization. And so if you say like, hey, I need to fill out this form, do you know where I would find that or whatever? You just have a contact that's a little more informal that can kind of help you. And so as maybe someone, more experienced who's been there longer and knows the ropes, but hasn't, isn't necessarily directly in charge of you, or is on kind of a more similar plane as far as their position.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that suggestion. I used to work at a place where we shared an office space with a bigger organization, and they called them buddies. And so, yeah, it was exactly that situation of a more peer person who you could ask those sort of informal questions to, and also someone who you could like have lunch with in the first few weeks as you're getting to know people, and and someone who can even say like, oh, this is the lunch place nearby that I like, or whatever. And of course, they're under no obligation to take you out to lunch, but just to have that social connection, who isn't necessarily your supervisor. I absolutely love that.
So, question building off of that, Alex. Does anybody have like a buddy system or even like a mentor? Like I know mentor, it's different, it's different than a peer-to-peer connection, but does anyone have a mentorship program like for at any level, whether it's physician, non-physician staff, clinical support? Does anybody have one of those? I know that they're a ton of work. Okay. No mentorships programs in this virtual room. Yeah. As far
as for me, like I've seen it done in other places. And so then I just, found out, like in my last job, I just made friends with an administrative assistant who knew everything, and she was an amazing resource. And so I just text her and be like, oh, this thing happened. What do I do for this? And she'd be like, oh, go fill out this document. Here's where you get it. And so it was very informal. But I have heard of places that, like do a specific pairing.
Yeah, that's great. And even if folks don't have a specific program, I think, a lot of the introducing you to other departments and things like that really allow new hire opportunities to sort of, again, you're not trying to assimilate, but, just sort of get into the fabric of the organization and, find out where the lunch places are, like Helen said. I love that.
Yeah, the buddy system at the other place, it was more of that informal. It was before someone was onboarded or before their first day, they would just say, who wants to be this person's buddy? And you would go from there. So yeah, I think that there are options, and there's definitely like a spectrum and a scale, depending on what direction you want to take it. But I love that suggestion in general. I think that's great.
So every new employee that comes on board with us, we buy them lunch on their first day, and our CEO comes in and our COO comes in and sits down and eats lunch with them, as well as the HR department. And then we spend, myself and my assistant spend the first 2 days with them, handing off each person that they need to get with. And then we have, once they get to their clinic that they're going to work at, they have that internal messaging system so they can reach us at any time with questions on who to go to. So.
Yeah, it sounds, Pepper, like I really love the level to which you're engaged with new folks. And I'm sure a lot of folks on the call do that. But yeah, I think that it's scary to be the new person, even if you're an extrovert. It's scary to be new and to know that everyone around you knows more about the organization than you do. And so to have that really warm welcome and I think to have the CEO and the COO on that first day show that they like care about you as an individual new hire is really great. So that all sounds awesome. Before we wrap up, are there any final ways in which y'all excel, or are there any things you're wanting to work on and think about as you're moving forward?
There was one thing I wanted to add, just the ACU, we give people space to learn. So we have people like sit in the trainings, do our self-paced courses, just see how the other staff members who have been there for a little bit longer kind of interact and use the material, those type of things, which I think is really helpful. I know for me, when I started, it was very helpful. Yeah, and I'm sorry if you hear knocking on the side. I thought somebody was knocking my window. My cat was trying to escape. So if you hear that, I apologize.
No worries. Yeah, I definitely agree. As a relatively new ACU person, I can attest to that yeah, I spent my first couple of months just watching and listening to Michelle and Suzanne. And then I was able to learn that way and get more comfortable with the content. And yeah, having that space to learn and grow is really great. All right, awesome. Well, thanks everyone for sharing. And I hope this has been, nice to hear how other folks are doing things that really work well and think about ways that you might want to adopt some of those practices or update anything. And yeah, we really appreciate that. And I'll turn it over to Suzanne now.
Awesome. Thanks, Helen, for taking us through the last bit of our content today. So as we wrap up today, I just want to do a couple things to reflect on the last 2 days. You guys are awesome. I know that sitting in a virtual room for 2 days is a lot, but you guys have been amazing and wonderful. And we hope that you all have found your time with us to be valuable and at the same time to really spark some conversations and thoughts as you are going to go back to, your prospective organizations or, get back to work at your organizations and really implement the things that we talked about and start to build your comprehensive retention and recruitment workforce plan. So having said that, I want to do something a little bit similar that we did yesterday. So I would love to say a key takeaway from today's session. So we just talked about interviews and onboarding, and we also talked about advertising and ways you get candidates and budget and recruitment team. What's one thing that either was a light bulb moment for you or reinforced for your organization, or maybe something that you really want to work on as an organization as it relates to your workforce plan? Or even just that feel like you're ready to start now, because I know we had some of you said that you didn't have a plan, and some of you said you did have a plan. All right, and I feel like I'm gonna sneeze, so apologize if I go off camera real quick. So creative advertising, wording and content to include. Yes, absolutely. I think that's so important to sort of have that base of those advertisements that you can utilize for all of your organizations. Including the CBHO and other department key hires. Yes, just sort of getting ideas about who can be on your recruitment team. Absolutely. Additional ideas for places to look and post your candidates. Yes, awesome. Providing a mentor. Hadn't thought of that before. Awesome. I love that. Yeah, mentorship programs can be really, really, really powerful, even if they are informal. And it's just something like, you create a space to do that. So. Anything else? Any other key takeaways that you guys have? These are great. Yeah, and again, we'll share the copy of those slides so you can see what was talked about in each of the small groups, because I know we did a report out for each of those, but we'll share those with you as well. Okay, and finally, last Mentimeter question of the day and of this workshop: what are you most looking forward to about completing and implementing your R&R plan, or starting it? So a lot of you at the beginning of the day said you were excited, interested, wanted to collaborate, any of those things. Honestly, just having it done can so relate to that, right? Checking another thing off the list. Yes, absolutely. And I think that you'll find once it's done, you'll be able to, you know, just, yeah, feel that relief. And then when it's time to update it or something that you want to update about it, then you can just, it's just easily to just, you know, switch it out. You're good to go. Actually having one. Yep, absolutely. And we're excited that you will have one when all of this is done. Feeling like all of the parties are involved and on the same page. Yes, absolutely. So true. And a lot of times, you know, someone mentioned silos earlier, and I think that's within any organization, and just sort of, you know, having something that you can point to say, okay, this is exactly what we're going to do for this process or this part or whatever, and really having something to point to. I think that's really, really important as well. Anything else before we go back to our slides for the last time here that you want to share? Building on what we do well to include additional best practices. Yes, exactly. And yesterday when I talked about, you know, innovating with data, a lot of times once you have something in writing, you can actually see what works well. And so you can say, okay, well, for example, like for advertising, oh, well, this is working well for this, but not for this group. And so you can, you know, continue doing what's working, and then pivot on where it isn't working with you. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for sharing those thoughts for the last time. And I'm going to stop sharing so then Helen can reshare the slides for the last time.
All right.
It's okay. Didn't want to go into full screen mode.
Oh boy, sorry, hold on just a second. There we go.
Okay.
I was happy
Great.
to share them.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you so much. So what's next? You've been here for 2 days with us. You guys have been awesome and amazing. We can't say it enough. We've really enjoyed our time with you guys, getting to know you all. And so what's next? So you're going to get an email with a lot of different resources. So in addition to a bunch of other different things, you're going to receive the recruitment and retention template and the instructions booklet. And so as Helen mentioned earlier, a lot of the activities, I know we didn't have too much time to really for y'all to dive into the worksheets, but those worksheets largely are bits and pieces of our retention and recruitment plan template. So, you know, if you want to just start there with that, that's great. Otherwise, you can look at the instructions and then sort of go, you know, from front to back. However it works for you, just start building it. You're also going to receive, I know I talked to you yesterday about the compensation webinar archive series, so you guys can take a look at that. We're also going to send you the financial assessment tool. Some other things that we'll send you, we'll resend you links to the slides. We will also send you a link to the recording of today's session, or the last 2 days, and then also the all of the different slides for the breakout session. So you're going to receive a lot of information there. So after that, you know, get your team together, just dive in, start anywhere where you can. You know, people ask, well, where should we start? Well, honestly, wherever you want to start is fine. Wherever makes sense for you to start is fine. Don't feel like you have to start, you know, obviously strategic planning or kind of, you're sort of a mini assessment is great. But if you want to start with a team or wherever you want to start is great. Just start. I think a lot of times starting is the hardest part there. And then once you have everything together, or as you're going along and as appropriate, discuss this process with your leadership. It's super, super important for leadership to be on board and for them to really have buy-in with what's going on. And then, start building your R&R plan. As I kind of out of order there, but really start building it. And I also wanted to mention, please feel free to contact us at any time. Someone had a question about one of our resources, and I said, I gave the answer, and then I said, we are here and available. You can contact us via email, and you can also always contact info@chcworkforce.org, and we can, get you the answer that way. So we are not going away after this. We want to be here to support you. And, if you had just, what did you guys mean about this? Feel free to just ask us. And we're happy, to support you. We want you to be successful in these efforts. And if, a quick email is going to, spur you to the next thing, we'd be happy to do that as well. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And so, as we wrap up today, just want to keep have a space for any questions you guys have. I know we've given you a lot of information, and you all have done such an amazing job at being such an engaged audience, asking thoughtful questions along the way, contributing and things like that. But we just wanted to hold some space before we wrap up for any questions. And while you're thinking of any questions that you might have, Mariah is going to put a link for an evaluation poll in the chat. We would be so grateful if you would answer that poll. It helps us as presenters, learn what we did well and what we need to improve on for next time. It also helps and is appreciated by BIPIC as we are, responsible for reporting our evaluation numbers to them as well. So, so go ahead and fill that out. We'll also send that link in our follow-up email with all the plethora of information that we're going to send. Any questions, thoughts, parting thoughts? All right. Well, thank you guys again so much for all your time and attention these past 2 days. We really hope that you thought it was helpful, and we're so glad that you were able to be with us. Keep in touch. If you're not signed up for our newsletter, feel free to do that at chcworkforce.org, and you can stay abreast of all of our new materials that are coming out.
Suzanne, there's a question in the chat. I just wanted to make sure that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it says, we're in dire need of a licensed clinical social worker. What can you recommend? I'm happy to maybe answer this.
Sure.
So I'm a social worker. I'm not licensed clinical, but I am a social worker. I would highly, highly recommend looking at the different social work schools that are really big pipelines. So personally, I went to USC. Their alumni network is incredibly strong, and they have field placements all over the country and very big on promoting job postings. Also, with the National Association of Social Workers, they have a job board. So they have their federal office, but each state has their own chapter as well. And a lot of social workers are involved in that, most being licensed and clinical. And then the other thing that I would say is, if you already have one on staff, they probably may know someone else, because I know that the difficulty is when somebody gets licensed, many times they leave. So I would say go to NASW, go to different social work schools, both local and those who have strong national reach or online programs, and then also go to the local NASW chapter. Okay, you already used and sent out a postcard to every single one. Yeah, it's hard. It is very hard to get the license. And also the other thing I would say what makes it even harder is the licensing board of social workers during COVID did not convert their testing to online, which caused a lot of people who were ready to be licensed to be held up for over a year. So that creates it's back now, but that I think created a stopgap with a lot of licensed social workers that were ready to go into the workforce. But I would highly suggest also looking at those schools that have online programs and national reach. NASW will be a really great resource as well. So yeah, just I just wanted to offer that.
That's great. Thank you, Kimberly and Pepper, for asking and sending suggestions, and obviously Michelle for jumping in. Any other questions as we wrap up? All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time and attention. We, we're here for you ongoing, so let us know what we can do and how we can help you both develop and implement your workforce plans, and reach out again. We'll see what we can do. Thank you guys so much. And thank you to Helen and Michelle and also Mariah, who you haven't seen, but she's in here all the time making all of this happen. So we really appreciate you. And I hope you guys take care, stay well, and we will hopefully see you guys soon.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks.